The classroom was like nothing found on Earth. It floated in space, a massive ring of metal and glass orbiting a distant star. Through the transparent walls, students could see the galaxy spreading out in all directions. Ships moved in the darkness, their lights blinking like fireflies. Taemin sat near the back of the room, his datapad balanced on his knee. He was one of only 3 humans in the entire Galactic Naval Academy. Getting accepted had been nearly impossible. Humans were new to space travel, barely 50 years since their first faster-than-light journey. Most alien species had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. The professor stood at the front of the class. His name was Velthar, and he belonged to the Vorlani species. He was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. 2 of his arms gestured at the holographic display floating above his desk. The other 2 held data tablets. This, Velthar said with obvious pride, is the newest warship in the Vorlani fleet, the Dreadnought-class battleship. It took 20 years to design and build. The hologram rotated slowly. The ship was beautiful in its own way. It looked smooth and elegant, like a piece of art. Blue lights ran along its surface. The hull was dark and polished. Energy crackled around it in a protective bubble. The alien students leaned forward, whispering to each other in various languages. Taemin's translator chip converted their words into Korean, though some things still didn't translate perfectly. Notice the plasma shield generators, Velthar continued, pointing with one of his upper arms. They create a barrier that can stop any weapon in the galaxy. Below that, you see the quantum torpedo tubes. And here, he gestured to the rear of the ship, are the main engines, powered by crystalline cores that will run for 100 years without refueling. A student from the Kralith species raised a clawed hand. Professor, how many ships like this does the Empire have? 12 are currently in service, Velthar answered, with 15 more under construction. They are the finest warships ever created. Taemin looked at the hologram carefully. He zoomed in on his datapad, studying different sections. Something bothered him, but he couldn't quite identify what it was. He looked at the shield generators, the weapons, the engines. Then he saw it. The ventral section of the hull, the bottom part near the engines, was completely smooth. There was nothing there but the basic hull plating. It looked thin, almost delicate. Taemin raised his hand. Velthar noticed him and nodded. Yes? Cadet Park? Professor, Taemin said, trying to keep his voice respectful. Why is there no armor plating on the ventral hull sections near the engine manifolds? The classroom went completely silent. The other students turned to stare at Taemin. Some of them had confused expressions. Others looked like they were trying not to laugh. One of the Kralith students actually did laugh. A barking sound that echoed in the quiet room. Velthar's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his large eyes. He set down his tablets and crossed all 4 of his arms. Armor plating? He repeated. Yes, sir, Taemin said. He felt his face getting warm, but he continued. The shields are impressive. But if they fail, that section looks vulnerable. The engines are right there, and there's no protection. More students started laughing now. Not loud, but the sound rippled through the classroom like a wave. Velthar held up one hand, and the laughter stopped. He walked closer to Taemin's desk. Cadet Park, he said slowly. I understand that humans are new to interstellar warfare. But perhaps you are not aware that energy shields have made physical armor obsolete. We are not barbarians who coat our ships in metal plates like primitive ocean vessels. Some students nodded in agreement. Others whispered to their neighbors. The shields on this dreadnought can withstand direct hits from a dozen ships firing simultaneously, Velthar continued. The chances of shield failure are approximately 0.001%. Adding armor would be a waste of resources and weight. It would slow the ship down and reduce power available for weapons and shields. Taemin nodded slowly. But sir, if shields are so reliable, why do the main bridge and the power core have secondary shielding? Velthar blinked. His lower hands tightened on the tablets he held. That is different, he said. Those are critical systems. Aren't the engines critical too? Taemin asked. Before Velthar could answer, another human voice spoke up. It was Hana, sitting 3 rows to Taemin's left. She was studying weapons systems. Professor, Hana said. In human naval history, we always assumed our defenses would fail eventually. We built backup systems and protection layers. Is there a reason Vorlani doctrine is different? Now, a third human voice joined in. Yuna, who specialized in tactical operations, leaned forward in her seat. The human military teaches that hope is not a strategy, she said quietly. We plan for the worst case. 1. The alien students were no longer laughing. Some looked annoyed. Others seemed confused by the questions. Velthar's expression hardened. He returned to the front of the class and dismissed the hologram with a wave of his hand. The Vorlani Empire has not lost a major fleet engagement in 300 years, he said coldly. Our doctrine has been tested and proven in countless battles. Physical armor is a relic of primitive warfare. We have evolved beyond such crude methods. He looked directly at Taemin. Perhaps humans still think in terms of their ancient wars, fighting with chemical explosives and metal bullets. But this is the modern age. Energy shields are absolute. They do not fail. The class session ended shortly after that. Students filed out of the classroom, many of them glancing at the 3 humans and whispering. Taemin gathered his things slowly. He felt embarrassed but also frustrated. His question had been genuine, not meant to insult anyone. Hana and Yuna waited for him by the door. That was interesting, Hana said as they walked into the corridor together. I made us all look stupid, Taemin said. No, Yuna replied. She pulled up her own datapad. You asked a good question. And did you notice? The professor didn't really answer it. Taemin stopped walking. What do you mean? He talked about how good the shields are, Yuna explained. He talked about their doctrine and their victories. But he never explained why they don't have backup protection. He just said they don't need it. The 3 humans stood in the corridor as other students flowed around them. I'm going to look something up, Taemin said. Something about human military history. Want to help? Hana smiled. I've got time. Me too, Yuna added. They headed toward the library, unaware that their simple question would change everything. Behind them, in the empty classroom, Professor Velthar stood alone, staring at the holographic display of the dreadnought. His 4 hands were clenched into fists. He had been teaching for 40 years. He had served in the fleet for 30 years before that. And in all that time, no one had ever asked him that question. Why was there no armor? He didn't have a good answer. The truth was, no one did. It was simply how things had always been done. Velthar dismissed the hologram and left the classroom, but the question followed him like a shadow. The library was quiet, except for the soft hum of computers. Taemin, Hana, and Yuna sat at a table in the human section, which was small compared to the areas dedicated to other species. Datapads and holographic displays covered the table between them. Look at this, Hana said, pulling up an image. It showed an ancient human warship from Earth's oceans. The vessel was made of thick metal plates. This is a battleship from the 20th century. See how thick the armor is? Some of these plates were over 30 centimeters thick. Taemin zoomed in on the image. But they also had other protection, right? Not just the armor? Exactly, Yuna said. She brought up a cross-section diagram. They had armor, but also internal bulkheads. These are like walls inside the ship. If one section got damaged and flooded with water, they could seal it off. The rest of the ship kept working. Multiple layers of defense, Taemin said thoughtfully. Even if the outer armor was breached, there were backup systems. Hana scrolled through more files. It gets better. They had damage control teams whose whole job was to fix problems during battle. If something caught fire, they put it out. If there was a hole in the hull, they patched it. The crews expected things to go wrong. That's so different from what we saw today, Yuna said. She pulled up the schematic of the Vorlani dreadnought that had been shown in class. Look at this design. Once the shields fail, there's nothing. The hull plating is just to hold air inside. It's not meant to stop weapons. Taemin stood and paced around the table. Why would they design ships like that? They're not stupid. The Vorlani have been building warships for thousands of years. Maybe they've never needed to, Hana suggested. The professor said they haven't lost a fleet battle in 300 years. But before that? Taemin asked. Yuna was already searching the Galactic Historical Database. Her fingers moved quickly across her datapad. Here's something. About 400 years ago, there was a war between the Vorlani and another species called the Therex. It says the Therex surrendered after losing 3 major fleet battles. Does it say how the battles went? Taemin leaned over to read the screen. It's brief, Yuna said, frowning. But it mentions that in all 3 battles, once a ship's shields failed, the crew surrendered immediately. It was standard practice. Continuing to fight with damaged shields was considered foolish. The 3 humans looked at each other. They surrender when their shields drop? Hana said slowly. That's their standard practice? It makes sense from their perspective, Taemin said. If your only defense is shields, and the shields are down, you're helpless. Better to surrender than die. But humans wouldn't do that, Yuna said. We'd keep fighting. Hana brought up more historical files from Earth. Because we always had to. We didn't have energy shields until we met the Vorlani 50 years ago. For thousands of years, we fought without them. We had to expect our defenses to fail. Taemin sat down again and pulled up his own datapad. He started making notes. So, galactic warfare is based on shield technology. Shields are incredibly reliable. When 2 fleets fight, the side with better shields usually wins. If your shields fail, you lose. And because shields almost never fail, Yuna continued, no one builds backup defenses. No armor. No internal protection. No damage control procedures. It's efficient, Hana admitted. Why waste resources on backup systems if the primary system never fails? Except it's not never, Taemin said. He was typing quickly now. The professor said 0.001% chance of failure. That's not 0. That's low. But it's not impossible. A voice spoke from behind them. You're thinking about this the wrong way. The 3 students turned. A man stood there. Older than them. With gray hair and tired eyes. He wore a human uniform, but with different insignia than the students. I'm Ji-woo, the man said. I teach military history in the human department. I heard about what happened in your class today. News travels fast, Taemin said with a slight smile. Ji-woo pulled up a chair. It does when 3 human students challenge Vorlani military doctrine in front of a class full of aliens. Can I see what you're working on? They showed him their notes and research. Ji-woo read through it carefully, nodding occasionally. You're on the right track, he said finally. But you're still thinking like the Vorlani. You're asking, what happens if shields fail? That's the wrong question. What's the right question? Yuna asked. What happens when shields fail? Ji-woo said, emphasizing the word when. Not if. When. Because everything fails eventually. Every system, every technology, every defense. It's not about probability. It's about time. He pulled up his own datapad and showed them a file. It was a message from someone named Sora. This is from Admiral Sora Bay, Ji-woo explained. She fought in the First Contact War, when humans first met the Vorlani. Do you know what happened in that war? The students shook their heads. It was brief, Ji-woo said. Only 3 engagements. The Vorlani had energy shields. We didn't. They destroyed half our fleet in the first battle. We should have lost, but we didn't, Hana asked. No, because after that first battle, we changed our tactics. We built ships that could take damage and keep fighting. We used ballistic weapons that were less effective against shields but worked fine against bare hulls. And most importantly, we refused to surrender. Ji-woo smiled slightly. The Vorlani were confused. They would knock down our shields, and we'd keep fighting. They'd damage our ships, and we'd keep coming. They'd cripple our engines, and we'd fire everything we had left. It wasn't how warfare was supposed to work according to their experience. What happened? Taemin was leaning forward now. The war ended in a stalemate. Neither side could afford to keep fighting. But the Vorlani gained respect for humans. They realized we were stubborn and unpredictable. That's why they offered us places in the Naval Academy. They wanted to understand how we think. Yuna pulled up the Vorlani dreadnought schematic again. So, our question in class today was more important than you realized? Ji-woo finished. You identified a fundamental weakness in Vorlani design philosophy. They've optimized everything for shield-based warfare. But what happens if they face an enemy that can break shields reliably? Or bypass them? Or simply outlast them? Their ships would be defenseless, Hana said quietly. Exactly, Ji-woo said. And they wouldn't know how to fight without shields because they've never had to. Taemin looked at his notes again. An idea was forming in his mind. Professor Ji-woo, is there any way we could test this? Run a simulation or something? You want to prove that human design philosophy is better? Ji-woo asked. Not better. Taemin corrected. Different. We think Professor Velthar dismissed our question too quickly. If we could show him actual results, Ji-woo considered this. You'd need approval from the Academy. You'd need to design a ship according to human principles. And you'd need someone willing to let you run a simulation against a Vorlani vessel. Would Professor Velthar agree to that? Yuna asked. Maybe, Ji-woo said. His pride was hurt today when he couldn't answer your question properly. He might agree to a simulation just to prove you wrong. Hana grinned. That could work. But you need to understand something, Ji-woo said seriously. If you lose this simulation, it will confirm everyone's belief that humans are primitive and don't understand modern warfare. You'll be embarrassed in front of the entire Academy. And if we win? Taemin asked. Ji-woo stood up. If you win, you'll force the Vorlani to question 300 years of military doctrine. You'll suggest that their fleet has a critical weakness. That's not something they'll accept easily. The three students looked at each other. The decision didn't take long. Let's do it, Taemin said. We'll need to design the ship carefully, Hana added. And plan the tactics, Yuna said. Ji-woo nodded. I'll help where I can. And I'll contact Admiral Sora. She'll want to know about this. But remember, you're not just representing yourselves, you're representing all of humanity. Make it count. After Ji-woo left, the three students stayed in the library late into the night. They pulled up every file they could find about human naval warfare. They studied armor thickness, damage control procedures, weapon types, and tactical doctrines. Outside the library windows, the stars turned slowly. Somewhere in that vast darkness, the galaxy continued its ancient patterns. But something was changing, something small but significant. Three human students were about to challenge the established order, armed with nothing but history and a simple question that no one had thought to ask. The simulation chamber was packed with students. Word had spread throughout the academy about the unusual challenge. Three human students were going to test their design against a standard Vorlani destroyer. Most came to watch what they expected would be an embarrassing defeat for the humans. Taemin stood in the control pod, his hands sweating slightly. Through the transparent walls, he could see Hana in the weapons pod and Yuna in the tactics pod. Each pod would control different aspects of their virtual ship during the battle. Professor Velthar stood at the center of the observation deck, his forearms crossed. He looked confident, almost amused. Next to him stood other professors and senior officers from various species. Are you ready, Cadet Park? Velthar's voice came through the communication system. Yes, sir, Taemin replied. His mouth was dry. Please display your ship design for the class, Velthar said. A hologram appeared in the center of the room. The human-designed ship rotated slowly. It looked crude compared to Vorlani vessels. Where their ships were smooth and elegant, this one was angular and blocky. Thick plates covered its hull. The surface was rough, covered with various sensors and equipment. Murmurs ran through the crowd of students. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. As you can see, Velthar said, addressing the crowd, the human design emphasizes physical armor. Note the thick plating around the engines and power core. This is similar to their ancient ocean vessels. He gestured with one hand, and specifications appeared next to the hologram. However, this armor comes at a cost. The ship's shields are only 60% as strong as a comparable Vorlani destroyer. Its main weapons are less powerful, and it's slower. More whispers from the crowd. The numbers didn't look good for the humans. The human ship also carries what they call railguns, Velthar continued. These are ballistic weapons that fire solid projectiles using magnetic acceleration. Quite primitive, but the cadets insisted on including them. Taemin watched as the Vorlani destroyer appeared on the other side of the simulation space. It was beautiful and deadly, bristling with energy weapons and wrapped in the shimmer of powerful shields. The scenario is simple, Velthar announced. 2 ships meet in open space. The engagement continues until one ship is disabled or surrenders. Standard rules of war apply. He looked at the control pods. Cadets, take your positions. The simulation begins in 30 seconds. Kroof. Taemin's hands moved over his controls. He activated the communication link with Hana and Yuna. Remember the plan, he said quietly. We're not trying to win quickly. We're trying to survive. Got it, Hana replied from the weapons pod. Ready here, Yuna added from tactics. The countdown began. 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 1. The simulation started. The Vorlani destroyer moved first, accelerating rapidly. Its energy weapons charged up, visible as glowing points on its hull. The destroyer was fast, much faster than the human ship. They're going for a quick kill, Yuna said. Trying to overwhelm us before we can react. Let them come, Taemin replied. He adjusted their ship's position, angling the heavily armored front section toward the enemy. The destroyer opened fire. Blue bolts of plasma screamed across the space between the ships. They impacted the human ship's shields with flashes of light. Shields at 70%, Taemin reported. The shields were weaker than he'd hoped. They're circling, Yuna said. Trying to hit our flank. Stay frontal to them, Taemin ordered. He adjusted the ship's rotation, keeping the armored nose pointed at the destroyer. More plasma bolts hit. The shields flickered and weakened. Shields at 40%, Taemin announced. His heart was pounding. Should I return fire? Hana asked. Not yet, Taemin said. Save power for shields. Let them think we're helpless. In the observation deck, students were pointing and talking. The human ship was taking a beating and not fighting back. They're not even trying, one student said. This is embarrassing, another added. Professor Velthar watched silently, his expression unreadable. The destroyer pressed its attack. It was confident now, moving closer to deliver more powerful shots. Shields at 20%, Taemin said. The control pod shook as weapons hit their barrier. Get ready. For what? Hana asked. Shields at 10%. Taemin counted down. 5%. 3%. The shields collapsed completely. The shimmer around the human ship vanished. A cheer went up from some students in the observation deck. The battle was over. According to standard doctrine, the human ship should surrender now, but nothing happened. Taemin. Velthar's voice came over the communication system. Your shields are down. Do you surrender? No, sir, Taemin replied calmly. Hana, now, fire everything. The human ship suddenly came alive. Energy weapons fired. But more importantly, the railguns activated. Solid projectiles shot out at incredible speed. The destroyer's captain, controlled by the simulation AI, hesitated. This wasn't normal. Ships didn't fight after losing shields. The hesitation lasted only a second. But it was enough. The railgun rounds hit the destroyer's shields. Energy shields were designed to stop plasma and lasers, things that moved at the speed of light. Ballistic weapons were different. They had mass. They hit the shields and kept pushing through the energy barrier. Their shields are fluctuating, Yuna reported. The railgun rounds are causing interference. Keep firing, Taemin ordered. He pushed the ship forward, moving directly toward the destroyer. The destroyer's weapons tore into the human ship's hull now. Without shields, the armor was all that protected them. Plasma bolts burned black scars across the thick plating. Hull breach in Section 3, Taemin reported. Red lights flashed on his console. Sealing bulkhead. We're losing atmospheric pressure, Hana said. Doesn't matter, Taemin replied. Keep firing. Yuna, damage report? We can take this, Yuna said, checking her screens. In the observation deck, the mood had changed. Students stopped laughing. They leaned forward, watching intently. They're still fighting, someone said in disbelief. The human ship continued forward, taking damage but not stopping. The railguns kept firing in steady bursts. More and more rounds hit the destroyer's shields. Enemy shield generator is overheating, Yuna announced. The mass of the projectiles is overwhelming their defensive systems. Well, the destroyer tried to pull back, but the human ship followed. It was slower, but relentless. We've got multiple hull breaches now, Taemin said. His voice remained calm despite the red warnings covering his console. But engines are still good. Weapons still firing. More plasma bolts hit the human ship. One struck near the engines. Alarms sounded. Engine efficiency down to 60%, Taemin reported. Good enough, Hana said. Their shields are failing. She was right. The shimmer around the destroyer was flickering now, growing weaker under the constant barrage of railgun fire. Target their shield generator directly, Taemin ordered. All railguns, concentrated fire. The human ship closed to point-blank range, almost ramming the destroyer. Every railgun fired at once, dozens of solid rounds striking the same point on the destroyer's hull. The destroyer's shields collapsed. Silence filled the observation deck. The destroyer, now without shields, hung in space. According to its programming, it should have shields. Losing shields wasn't part of its combat algorithms. The AI controlling it didn't know what to do. Fire missiles, Taemin said quietly. 2 missiles launched from the human ship. They moved slowly compared to energy weapons. But they didn't need to be fast. The destroyer had no shields and no armor. The missiles struck its engine section. Explosions bloomed across the destroyer's hull. The engines went dark. The weapons stopped firing. The ship drifted. Disabled. The simulation ended. The words "Simulation complete, human vessel victorious" appeared in large letters over the combat area. No one in the observation deck spoke. Students stared at the results, in shock. The human ship was a wreck, covered in damage and barely functional. But it had won. The superior Vorlani destroyer had been defeated. Taemin, Hana, and Yuna climbed out of their control pods. They were shaking slightly from adrenaline but trying to look calm. Professor Velthar walked slowly toward them. His expression was impossible to read. The observation deck remained silent, everyone waiting to see what he would say. You continued fighting after shield failure, Velthar said. Yes, sir, Taemin replied. Your ship took massive damage. You had multiple hull breaches. You lost 30% engine capacity. Yes, sir. By Vorlani doctrine, you should have surrendered when your shields failed. We're not Vorlani, sir, Taemin said respectfully. We're human. We're taught to keep fighting. Velthar was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to face the crowd of students. This simulation demonstrates something important, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. The human ship was inferior in every measurable way. Weaker shields, less powerful weapons, slower engines. By all logic, it should have lost. He paused. But it won. And it won because the humans planned for failure. They assumed their shields would drop. They built their ship to fight without shields. They trained to continue combat under the worst conditions. Velthar looked back at the 3 human students. The destroyer lost because once its shields failed, it had nothing left. No backup plan. No secondary defenses. It was, as the humans might say, a glass cannon. Some students in the crowd looked thoughtful now. Others still seemed skeptical. "This is only one simulation," a Kralith student called out. "Against a destroyer, not a dreadnought." "True," Velthar acknowledged. "But it proves that human design philosophy has merit. We have dismissed physical armor and redundancy as primitive. But perhaps we were wrong." He turned to Taemin. "I owe you an apology, Cadet Park. Your question in class was valid. I dismissed it out of pride." "No apology needed, sir," Taemin said. "Nevertheless," Velthar said, "I will be forwarding this simulation to High Command. They should see these results." As students filed out of the chamber, discussing what they'd witnessed, the three humans stood together. "We did it," Hana said quietly. "We proved the point," Yuna added. Taemin looked at the simulation displays, now dark. Something bothered him, a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. "I hope we were wrong," he said softly. "What do you mean?" Hana asked. "I hope the Vorlani never face an enemy that can break through their shields," Taemin explained. "Because if they do, they're not ready for it." None of them knew that in a distant part of the galaxy, sensors were detecting something unusual. Ships were emerging from dark space. Ships that had been watching and waiting, ships whose only purpose was conquest. The Drex Collective had arrived. 3 months passed since the simulation. Life at the Naval Academy continued as normal. Taemin, Hana, and Yuna returned to their regular classes. Some students treated them with new respect. Others still considered them primitive humans who had gotten lucky once. Professor Velthar had indeed sent the simulation results to Vorlani High Command. They acknowledged receiving the report. Then nothing happened. No response. No questions. No changes to ship designs or fleet doctrine. The report disappeared into the massive bureaucracy of an empire that had ruled space for 300 years. Taemin tried not to think about it too much. He had other exams to worry about, other projects to complete. The simulation had proven his point. That should have been enough. Then the news arrived. It started as a rumor whispered between students in hallways. Something had happened at the border. A Vorlani patrol had missed its scheduled check-in. These things happened occasionally due to equipment malfunctions or communication errors. Nothing to worry about. But then another patrol went silent. And another. Within a week, emergency announcements echoed through the academy. All military personnel were recalled to active duty. Classes were suspended. The academy went into lockdown mode. Taemin sat in the human dormitory with Hana and Yuna, watching news broadcasts on the public channels. The reports were confusing and contradictory, but one thing was clear. Someone was attacking Vorlani border systems. "They're calling them the Drex Collective," Hana said, reading from her datapad. "No one's heard of them before. They came from uncharted space." "How many ships?" Yuna asked. "Unknown," Hana replied. "Communications from the border are difficult. Some stations aren't responding at all." The door to the dormitory opened. Professor Velthar entered, followed by Jiwoo. Both looked exhausted. "We need to talk," Velthar said without greeting. He sat heavily in a chair, a gesture of familiarity he'd never shown before. "What I'm about to tell you is classified. But the situation requires it." The three students sat up straighter, paying attention. 3 days ago, Admiral Kethrol led the Third Fleet to engage the Drex at Sigma Station, Velthar began. His voice was hollow. The Third Fleet consisted of 42 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts. It was one of our most powerful forces. "What happened?" Taemin asked, though he already feared the answer. "They were destroyed," Velthar said simply. 30 ships lost. The remaining 12 retreated. Admiral Kethral's flagship barely escaped. The humans stared at him in shock. The Vorlani hadn't suffered such a defeat in centuries. "How?" Yuna asked. Jiwoo pulled up a holographic display. It showed combat footage, grainy and broken, from Kethral's ship. "Watch," he said. The footage played. The human students saw the Drex ships for the first time. They were angular and dark, covered in strange symbols. The Drex fleet was smaller than the Vorlani force. Maybe 20 ships against 42. The battle began normally. The Vorlani ships moved into formation, their shields glowing, weapons charged. Then the Drex fired. What came from their ships wasn't plasma or lasers. It was something else. A kind of purple energy that rippled through space. When it hit the Vorlani shields, something terrible happened. The shields didn't just fail. They collapsed instantly, as if someone had simply turned them off. One moment they were there, the next, they were gone. "What is that?" Hana whispered. "We don't know," Velthar said. "Some kind of shield disruption technology. It specifically targets energy barriers and cancels them out." The footage continued. Without shields, the Vorlani ships were helpless. The Drex weapons tore through their hulls like paper. Ships exploded or broke apart within seconds. Some tried to retreat. But the Drex were faster. Some ships simply stopped moving, their crews surrendering immediately as doctrine required. The surrendered ships were destroyed anyway. "They don't take prisoners," Jiwoo said quietly. The footage ended. The room was silent. "This is what you warned us about," Velthar said to Taemin. "Our ships have no defense once shields are gone. We have no armor, no secondary systems, no training for fighting without shields. The Drex know this. They've been watching us. They designed their entire strategy around our weakness." 2. "How long have they been observing?" Yuna asked. "Unknown," Velthar replied. "Could be decades, could be centuries. They've been in dark space, studying us, preparing for this exact attack." Taemin stood and walked to the window. Outside, he could see ships moving in the darkness. More vessels than usual. All military. All preparing for something. "What happens now?" he asked. "The Drex are advancing toward the core systems," Jiwoo said. "They've taken 5 border stations already. At their current speed, they'll reach Vorlana Prime, the homeworld, in about 2 weeks." "Can't the fleet stop them?" Hana asked. Velthar made a gesture with his hands that might have been the Vorlani equivalent of a shrug. "Every fleet we send faces the same problem. The Drex cancel our shields, then destroy us. We've been trying different tactics, but nothing works. Our entire military is built around shield technology." "What about other species?" Yuna suggested. "Allies? Other empires?" "Messages have been sent," Jiwoo said. "But the other powers are waiting to see what happens. If the Vorlani Empire falls, they want to be ready to take our territory, not waste resources helping us." "Resources. Resources. Resources." Taemin turned back to face the room. "You came here for a reason. You want our help." Velthar stood slowly. For the first time since Taemin had met him, the professor looked old and tired. "Yes," Velthar said. "We need human help. Admiral Kethril specifically requested you 3. He remembered reading about your simulation. He wants to meet with you." "What can we possibly do?" Hana asked. "We're just students. You can teach us to fight like humans," Velthar said. "You can show us how to survive when shields fail. You can help us retrofit our ships with armor and secondary systems." "There's no time for that," Yuna objected. "Retrofitting an entire fleet would take months. You said the Drex will reach the homeworld in 2 weeks." "We know," Jiwoo said. "That's why the plan is different. We can't change the ships in time, but we can change how the crews fight." Taemin understood. "You want to train them in human combat doctrine." "Yes," Velthar confirmed. "Train them to keep fighting when shields drop. Train them in damage control. Train them to think like humans, to expect the worst and prepare for it." "That's not something you can learn in 2 weeks," Hana said. "Then we'll learn what we can," Velthar replied. "It's better than nothing. Right now, when our shields fail, our crews panic and surrender. If we can teach them to stay calm and keep fighting, we have a chance." Yuna looked at Taemin and Hana. "This isn't our war. We're not even officially military yet." "No," Taemin agreed. "But if the Vorlani fall, the Drex won't stop. They'll keep conquering. Eventually they'll reach Earth, and Earth doesn't have the military to stop them." Hana added quietly. Jiwoo nodded. "Earth's government has been informed. They're sending whatever support they can. But it won't be much. A few advisors. Some old warships from the First Contact War. Not enough to change the tide of battle. Taemin made his decision. When do we leave? Now. Velthar said. Admiral Kethral is assembling the defense fleet at Vorlana Prime. Every available ship from across the Empire is gathering there. It will be the largest fleet ever assembled. Over 300 ships. Against how many Drex? Yuna asked. Intelligence estimates between 80 and 100 ships, Jiwoo said. But their ships are more advanced than ours in some ways. The three humans looked at each other. This was bigger than a simulation. This was real combat with real consequences. We'll help, Taemin said finally. But I need to be honest. I don't know if human tactics will work. We've never fought the Drex. We don't know their weaknesses. Neither do we, Velthar said. But at least human tactics are designed for fighting without shields. That's more than we have now. Within hours, Taemin, Hana, and Yuna were on a fast transport heading toward Vorlana Prime. The academy disappeared behind them. Replaced by the endless darkness of space, Hana stared out the window at the passing stars. I can't believe this is happening. I can, Yuna said quietly. She was reviewing tactical files on her datapad. We warned them. We showed them the weakness. They just didn't listen in time. They're listening now, Taemin said. Is it enough? Hana asked. Taemin didn't answer. He honestly didn't know. Human combat doctrine had evolved over thousands of years of brutal warfare. The Vorlani had 2 weeks to learn it. Even if they understood the theory, putting it into practice under real combat conditions would be something else entirely. Through the transport window, Vorlana Prime appeared in the distance. It was a beautiful planet, blue and green like Earth, wrapped in rings of orbital stations. Around it, ships were gathering, hundreds of them, all shapes and sizes, all converging on this one point in space. The defense fleet was assembling. In 2 weeks, the Drex would arrive. Taemin pulled out his datapad and began making notes. If they only had 2 weeks, they couldn't waste a single minute. They would need to identify the most critical tactics, the ones that could be learned quickly. They would need to prioritize damage control procedures over complex maneuvers. They would need to teach the Vorlani something that went against their entire culture. They would need to teach them not to surrender. We can do this, he said, trying to convince himself as much as his friends. Humans have overcome worse odds. When? Yuna asked skeptically. Taemin smiled slightly. Pretty much every war we've ever fought. The transport continued toward Vorlana Prime, carrying 3 human students, and the faint hope that humanity's long history of violence and survival might save a civilization that had forgotten what it meant to truly fight. The command center of the Vorlani flagship was chaos. Officers rushed between stations, checking systems and coordinating hundreds of ships. In the center stood Admiral Kethral, his forearms moving constantly as he reviewed tactical displays. He was old for a Vorlani, his skin marked with scars from previous battles. Taemin, Hana, and Yuna stood near the Admiral's command platform. 2 weeks had passed in a blur of desperate training sessions. They had traveled to dozens of ships, teaching crash courses in damage control and survival tactics. They had worked with engineering teams, showing them how to reinforce critical systems. They had argued with proud captains who didn't want to hear advice from human students. Some had listened, some hadn't. Now the Drex fleet was 3 hours away. Status report, Admiral Kethral commanded. A Vorlani officer responded. All ships are in position. 347 vessels total. We have them arranged in a defensive sphere around Vorlana Prime. Taemin studied the tactical display. The Vorlani fleet was massive, but he still felt uneasy. Quantity wasn't everything. Enemy fleet composition? The Admiral asked. 92 Drex ships, confirmed, another officer replied. They're maintaining tight formation, speed unchanged. Admiral Kethral turned to the humans. Will our preparations be enough? I don't know, sir. Taemin answered honestly. We've done what we can. The crews understand the basics of damage control now. They know not to surrender when shields fail, but understanding and doing are different things. A new voice joined the conversation. The human frigates are in position. Taemin turned to see a woman in a human military uniform approaching. She was middle-aged with sharp eyes and confident posture. Captain Mirai Song, she introduced herself. I'm commanding the Earth forces. 5 frigates, not much, but they're tough. Every ship helps, Kethril said. Mirai looked at the tactical display. I've reviewed your defensive plan. It's too passive. The Drex will just sit back and pound you with their shield-breaking weapons. What do you suggest? Kethril asked. We need to force close combat, Mirai said. Get in among them where they can't use their formations effectively. Make it messy and chaotic. Humans are good at messy combat. That's not standard Vorlani doctrine. An officer objected. Your standard doctrine got the Third Fleet destroyed. Mirai replied bluntly. No offense, Admiral. But you asked for human help. This is what it looks like. Kethril was quiet for a moment. Then he gestured to his tactical officer. Modify the plan. Send the instruction to all ships. When the Drex engage, we advance and close distance. Standard fleet formations are secondary to disrupting enemy coordination. The officer looked shocked but obeyed. One more thing. Hana spoke up. She had been working on weapon systems. The Drex shields are strong against energy weapons, but we haven't seen them tested against ballistic weapons. I've had teams install railguns on as many ships as possible. Not many. Maybe 40 ships. But it's something. 40 ships with railguns against 92 Drex vessels, an officer muttered. The numbers don't favor us. Numbers never favor defenders, Yuna said. She had been studying historical battles on Earth. Every successful defense in human history succeeded because the defenders were willing to pay a higher price than the attackers expected. What price? The officer asked. Everything, Yuna replied simply. An alarm sounded. The Drex fleet had been detected entering the system. All hands to battle stations, Kethril ordered. Activate shields. Charge weapons. The command center's lighting changed to a red combat mode. Officers took their positions. The massive view screen showed space around Vorlana Prime, with hundreds of green dots representing the Vorlani fleet. In the distance, red dots appeared. The Drex were coming. Taemin felt his heart racing. This was nothing like a simulation. Real ships would be destroyed. Real people would die. The weight of it pressed down on him. You've done well, Admiral Kethril said quietly to the 3 humans. Whatever happens today, know that you've given us a chance. That's more than we had 2 weeks ago. Thank you, sir, Taemin replied. The Drex fleet moved closer. Their ships were dark and threatening, maintaining perfect formation. They showed no hesitation, no fear. They had defeated Vorlani fleets before. They expected to do so again. They're charging weapons, a sensor officer announced. All ships, brace for impact, Kethril ordered. The Drex fired their shield-disrupting weapons. Purple energy rippled across space, washing over the Vorlani fleet like a wave. Shields flickered and died throughout the formation. In seconds, 300 ships lost their primary defense. Shields down across the fleet, an officer reported, his voice shaking. This was the moment when previous Vorlani fleets had broken. When crews had panicked and surrendered. Taemin held his breath. All ships, this is Admiral Kethril. The Admiral's voice boomed across the fleet communication system. Shields are down. We expected this. Continue combat operations. All vessels advance and engage. For a moment, nothing happened. The Vorlani fleet hung in space, vulnerable and exposed. Then they moved forward. Not all of them. Some ships hesitated. Some hung back, their crews uncertain, but most advanced. The training had worked, at least partially. Fleet is advancing, the tactical officer reported with surprise in his voice. The Drex seemed confused. They fired again, but the Vorlani ships kept coming. Without shields, the Vorlani vessels started taking damage. Hull plating burned and cracked. Some ships lost weapons or engines, but they didn't stop. Close to weapons range, Kethral ordered. All ships fire at will. The Vorlani fleet opened fire. Energy weapons lit up space. The Drex shields absorbed most of it, but the sheer volume of fire began to overwhelm their defenses. Then the 40 ships with railguns fired. Solid projectiles tore through space. Unlike energy weapons, they had mass. They punched through Drex shields and slammed into hulls. 3 Drex ships took critical damage immediately, their armor caving under the kinetic impacts. "It's working," Hana said excitedly. "The railguns are effective, but we're taking heavy casualties." Yuna countered, watching her display. "We've lost 18 ships already." The battle became chaos. Ships from both sides filled the combat zone. There was no elegant formation, no careful strategy. It was brutal and desperate. Exactly what Mireille had suggested. Human frigates moved through the chaos like sharks. They were small and fast, darting between larger vessels. Commander Deho Kang led them, his voice calm on the communication channels as he coordinated hit-and-run attacks. A Drex cruiser targeted the flagship, its weapons charged, preparing to fire. "Incoming fire," an officer warned. "Brace for impact," Kethral ordered. The weapons hit the flagship's hull. Explosions rocked the ship. The lights flickered. Alarms screamed. "Damage report," Kethral demanded. "Hull, breach on decks 5 and 6. Fire in the engineering section. Life support failing in sections C and D." Before the training, this would have been cause for panic. But the damage control teams had been drilled repeatedly over the past 2 weeks. "Seal bulkheads around the breach," Taemin called out, helping coordinate the response. "Divert power from non-essential systems to life support. Get fire suppression teams to engineering." The crew responded quickly. The breach was sealed. The fires were contained. The ship remained in the fight. "We're still operational," the engineer reported with amazement. Similar scenes played out across the fleet. Vorlani ships took damage that would have disabled them before, but now they kept fighting. Damage control teams worked frantically. Crews refused to abandon their posts. The Drex had expected quick surrender. Instead, they faced determined resistance. "Enemy fleet is regrouping," Yuna announced. "They're trying to form up again. Don't let them." Mireille's voice came over the command channel. "All ships, press the attack. Keep them scattered." The Vorlani fleet surged forward. Some ships were barely functional, trailing atmosphere and debris. But they continued fighting. A Vorlani dreadnought, its engines crippled and weapons offline, suddenly changed course. It aimed directly at a Drex battleship. "What is that ship doing?" an officer asked. Taemin understood. "They're ramming." The dreadnought, having nothing left to lose, slammed into the Drex battleship at full speed. Both ships exploded in a massive fireball. "By the stars," Kethral whispered. It was a human tactic. One that seemed insane to Vorlani thinking. But it worked. The sacrifice of one ship destroyed an enemy vessel that might have destroyed 3 more Vorlani ships. The battle raged for hours. Both sides lost ships steadily. The space around Vorlana Prime filled with debris and wreckage. But slowly, gradually, the tide turned. The Drex had expected an easy victory. They had expected the Vorlani to break and surrender. Instead, they faced enemies who fought with desperate courage. Every Drex ship destroyed required enormous effort. The Vorlani were taking losses, but they were making the Drex pay for every meter of space. "Enemy fleet is withdrawing," the sensor officer announced suddenly. Everyone in the command center turned to look at the display. The Drex ships, or what remained of them, were pulling back. They had lost almost half their fleet. The attack had cost too much. "Should we pursue?" an officer asked. "No," Kethral said firmly. "Let them go. We've won enough for today." Cheers erupted in the command center. Officers embraced each other. Some were crying. The Vorlani fleet had suffered heavy losses. Nearly 40% of their ships destroyed or disabled. But they had won. They had defended their homeworld. Taemin sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. Hana and Yuna joined him. All three humans too tired to celebrate. We did it, Hana said quietly. The Vorlani did it, Taemin corrected. We just showed them how. Admiral Kethril approached them. His uniform was torn and burned in places. One of his arms was bandaged. You saved us, he said simply. Not with superior weapons or shields. You saved us by teaching us to survive. The Drex will come back, Yuna warned. This was just one battle. Yes, Kethril agreed. But next time, we'll be ready. We've learned that armor matters. That redundancy saves lives. That fighting spirit is as important as technology. These lessons will change how we build ships and train crews from now on. He looked out at the view screen, where damaged Vorlani ships were being helped to orbital stations. For 300 years, we've had peace because of our technological superiority, Kethril said. We forgot what our ancestors knew. That survival requires more than just good shields. It requires the will to keep fighting when everything fails. 2 weeks later, Taemin, Hana, and Yuna returned to the Naval Academy. The campus looked the same, but they had changed. They had seen real combat, experienced real loss. Professor Velthar met them at the entrance. He looked older but somehow more alive. Welcome back, he said. You're heroes now. Did you know that? The three human students who changed galactic warfare. We're just students, Taemin said uncomfortably. Not anymore, Velthar replied. He led them toward the main classroom building. The academy curriculum is being revised. Human military history is now required study. We're adding courses on damage control, armor design, and defensive tactics. Things we should have been teaching all along. They reached the same classroom where Taemin had first asked his question about armor. Velthar stood at the front, looking at the seats filled with new students, both alien and human. Class, Velthar began. Today we study the Battle of Vorlana Prime, the day the Vorlani learned humility, the day we remembered that hope is not a strategy. He pulled up a hologram of a new Vorlani warship design. It bristled with armor plating, had redundant systems, and looked less elegant but far more practical. This is our future, Velthar said. Built on the knowledge that everything can fail, that defenses will be breached, that survival requires preparation, not optimism. He looked directly at Taemin, Hana, and Yuna sitting in the back row. And it started with a simple question. Why are your warships missing armor here? Taemin smiled slightly. That question had seemed so innocent 3 months ago. Now it had changed an empire. Outside the classroom windows, ships moved through space. Vorlani vessels now patrolled alongside human frigates, two species, once separated by pride and misunderstanding, now united by the hard lessons of war. The Drex would return someday. Everyone knew it. But when they did, they would find an enemy transformed. An enemy that had learned from humanity's 10,000 years of brutal warfare. They would find an enemy that knew how to survive. And that, Taemin thought, was the most human thing of all.